Hello F1 fans, welcome back to the F1 Masters podcast brought to you by AUBG Daily. As usual, you're with myself, Vasco and Harry, and in this episode, we're gonna make a different topic. We will compare Formula One teams, the top 5 Formula One teams at the moment, to some of the English Premier League teams and kind of compare how they've progressed throughout their histories. And we can begin with the first team we have, which is Red Bull. Vasco, could you tell us who we've compared them to?
We have compared Red Bull to Chelsea mainly because of the similarities that they have. First of all, Dietrich Mateschitz and Roman Abramovich. At the same time, a big investment into a team that in the case of F1, the team was rebranded. In the case of Premier League, Chelsea, they have been given an amazingly big financial boost that make them title contenders, actually. And I see how the comparison between Red Bull and Chelsea may seem strange, but actually, when we see it, these titles that Chelsea had during the 2010s can be really compared to the titles of Red Bull from 2010 to 2013. And also, I think we can draw a comparison between Eden Hazard and Max Verstappen in a way, because the coat that was towards Eden Hazard in Chelsea really looks similar to the way fans see Max Verstappen in Red Bull. And with the similar time frame that they have been winning and the similar idea behind the teams, I think this is the perfect comparison between teams in F1 and Premier League.
Yeah, I do see a lot of similarities with it. Another team that I think is a really strong comparison is Ferrari and Manchester United. Ferrari and Manchester United, respectively, the most historic teams, we could say, in their respective sports, but both have really struggled for success in the last years. I kind of compare the Sir Alex Ferguson days to that kind of Jean Todt era for Ferrari and how they were unbeatable with Schumacher especially. But over the last few years, they've both become sort of memes and laughing stocks of their respective leagues. We've seen Ferrari on many occasions bottle the league. Manchester United have also been pretty far away from any title in recent years. But even though these are the biggest teams in both of their sports, they both find themselves struggling at the moment.
And I think we can draw a really good comparison between the season with the Aguero goal and the way Felipe Massa lost the F1 title to Lewis Hamilton. I think there are a lot of similarities. Yes, both teams are history makers. They're the most successful teams domestically. But in the recent years, which have been more than 10 for Manchester United and around 15 for Ferrari, the way these teams are controlled have simply not been efficient enough. And Ferrari, although there were some great moments, like with Sebastian Vettel when he was driving for the team, and he had a bit of a championship hopes, the same way United managed to end up in the second place in the Premier League in some of the previous seasons. But overall, for a really long time, these historical beasts haven't been close to where they should be. And I think that is why we should draw a comparison between them. And this comparison is really greatly summarize how in the past years both Ferrari and Manchester United have been developing.
I agree with you both, but I still think there's a slight difference as Ferrari is closer to the top of the field when compared to Manchester United, because United is 6th in the league currently and Ferrari is 2nd in the constructors, which means that Ferrari are on a better trajectory, let's say. Maybe they can reach the top like in 2 years. Still, I really absolutely agree with both of your comparisons, and I think we can move on to the third team, which is McLaren, and we are going to compare them to Arsenal. Both teams had their fair share of fame and success. Around 15-20 years ago, McLaren's last title was 2008 and Arsenal's last title was the Invincible season in 2004. There were like star-studded teams, Arsenal had some amazing players. McLaren had Lewis Hamilton, and also before that, they had Mika Hakkinen. We can make a lot of comparisons between these two teams.
Yeah, McLaren, they have not had any success pretty much since 2008. They were still competing at the top towards 2012. We could say the same for Arsenal, except for a longer duration of years. And in terms of they were fighting for top four consistently. But then I guess throughout the mid 2010s and late 2010s, both teams kind of just fell off. McLaren, we know the McLaren Honda days, of course, and they went towards the bottom of the standings. Arsenal themselves have struggled. Before this year, they hadn't reached the Champions League in 8 years, I believe, something like this. And kind of similarly to McLaren, they're back up on this trajectory. They finished fourth last season, and currently they sit third in the championship. And Arsenal, over the last few years, with Mikel Arteta, have moved up the standings as well. They finished second last year, currently in the title fight as well. And both teams, they have a good amount of history in their respective leagues. And I don't know anything else to add.
I think that we can compare them like Arsenal, they have been always considered as one of the best teams in England, but they haven't been quite there. Like, they have always been one bracket below Manchester United and Liverpool, and I think it's the same with McLaren. Although they're one of the biggest historical teams, I think they haven't matched up what Ferrari have done throughout the history of F1, and that is another line where we can compare these teams. But for me, a really interesting comparison is between Ron Dennis and Arsene Wenger, because they have been quite influential for the way the teams have been developing in the noughties and in the 90s. And I think with Arsene Wenger, Arsenal have had somebody who tries to play modern football and who just put them on the map again as a competitor. And with McLaren, with Ron Dennis, it was the same. He was the guy, he was the leader, and I think there can be a really good comparison drawn between them, because I really think Arsene Wenger is like the Ron Dennis of football. And moving on to the most recent historical successes, Mercedes and the comparison with Manchester City.
I think it's obvious that both teams do not have much history. This is one of the reasons why we chose this. And they achieved huge success in the last 10-15 years. Mercedes just spawned out of nowhere in 2010, and they needed 4 years in order to just become dominant. I mean, Manchester City, similar story. They received investment in, what year was it?
I think 2009.
2008, I think.
Yeah, 2008 from the Sheikh. And Mercedes, it was 1 year later. And I mean, both teams have dominated the sport. Like, Manchester City are currently still dominating, and this is a slight difference because Mercedes, since 2021, they've been on the downward trajectory. And
yeah, we could say Mercedes, they pretty much revived a dying team in Honda, who in 2008, they had quit in terms of the sport. They had no money, no nothing. Jenson Button, in fact, he didn't even have a seat. And then all of a sudden we had Ross Brawn step in for 1 year to keep the team up. They ended up winning the championship, and afterwards Mercedes, huge investment, and since 2014 they became this powerhouse similar to Manchester City after they received their investments. Although their team wasn't necessarily dying, but it was a struggling mid to low table team in the Premier League.
Well, they have been relegated, I think, twice in the history of the Premier League after 92, and they haven't been a contender or considered as a part of a big four or big six before the huge money investment. And I think that is what makes them really similar. The story of dominance, the story of how you can invest a lot of money, but in a really effective way, and essentially create a dynasty. Because what Mercedes have been doing for the period between 2014 and 2021, that has been one of the most successful dynasty in F1. And similarly, Manchester City, although they lost one of their titles to Liverpool, the rest of it, there have been like 16 years since the investment, and City have won a lot of titles, and they are the team to beat in England right now. And I think that is why we can really see the similarities between both teams.
I would also like to draw a comparison between the stars of the two teams. So for me, Lewis Hamilton and Sergio Aguero are similar in the way that they became like icons. Even though Aguero is not that popular, I still think that they were very influential for their teams, and without them, maybe the success wouldn't have been so huge. What do you think, guys?
I think maybe I can draw a better comparison between Toto Wolff and Pep Guardiola, because they were the leaders needed to these teams, and they know, even if they lose, how to bounce back and be even stronger. And they know how to, as I already said, how to create a dynasty and be considered as the strongest team, the team to be beaten by the rest of the field. And sometimes, even during the best years of Mercedes, they have been looking like the best years of Manchester City. Whatever the other teams tried, they knew that they weren't going to be even close to the title.
Our final team comparison is Aston Martin and Newcastle. So Aston Martin, formerly Racing Point, formerly Force India, they were a staple in the midfield and had for a long time, I guess, minimal success, but they had the potential to outperform what the car did. Many podiums and surprise results from that team, working on a low budget. And most recently, once Aston Martin stepped in, they received these huge investments with the goal to propel them to the top of F1. Similarly, we could say for Newcastle, they were a mid-table team to low-table team, even getting relegated on a couple of occasions. But they had these seasons of hope and kind of a glimpse of success where we've seen them reach European spots, and most recently they also received large investments and they managed to qualify for the Champions League last year, and even now, even though they're not having as good of a season as last year, they're still fighting for European spots. So both of these teams are kind of on an upward trajectory thanks to large investments.
They have been teams in development, and actually I think what makes this comparison really great is that we still don't know their ceiling, actually, because after the regulations, if Aston Martin make a serious investment, and they can be actually one of the better teams, and they can be even part of a new top 3 or top 4, something like that. And the situation is similar with Newcastle, and I think this is probably the most accurate comparison because of the places where these teams are right now, because we saw last season Newcastle overperformed really and managed to secure a spot in the Champions League, and the same with Aston Martin, because the car they had in the beginning of the season really pushed them in these top spots. But I think there is only one thing that is needed for this comparison to be amazing, to be match made in heaven. And this is the son of the owners of Newcastle to play in the team. I think that would be the perfect thing. Imagine having even a comparison for Lance Stroll in football perspective. That would be mind-blowing.
It would be hilarious. I absolutely agree with you, and I think that the huge investments that Lawrence Stroll made in the infrastructure can be compared to the transfers that Newcastle are making, and who knows, like only time will tell whether these teams can reach the absolute top.
And before we end, I want to make a quick comparison again between Ferrari, Mercedes, and Manchester United and Manchester City. And that is throughout the seasons that from 2014 to I think 2020 or 2021, United had 2 second place finishes, and they really look in similar way to Vettel in Ferrari and the way he was fighting against Lewis Hamilton and against Mercedes. But in the end, I think everybody knew that, oh yeah, they will put up some fight, and in the beginning of the season it will look close, because United, they were even standing on the top of the Premier League during, I think, 2019 or 2020 season after New Year. But then a sudden drop came in a similar way to, let's say, Vettel in Germany. And that is where we can draw a line for comparison, because no matter what the other teams tried, Mercedes and Manchester City were staying at the top, and they just knew how to win.
It's kind of reminiscent towards a modern derby or modern rivalry in terms of Ferrari and Mercedes during the hybrid era. And when we look at Ferrari versus McLaren, a more traditional rivalry, just like Manchester United and Arsenal are. So there's really a lot of similarities we can take away from all these comparisons. But yeah, I think this is all for today from us. We're looking forward to the next episode. Till then, like, subscribe, and follow us in AUBG Daily on Instagram and Facebook, and stay tuned for more of our content. Thank you, and remember,
If you no longer go for a gap that exists,
You're no longer a racing driver.